Hello and welcome to episode 15 of The Terror Cellar. I'm Andy Crofts and it is great to be back this week with more stories. Well, I have, as usual, a couple of fantastic stories for you right now, okay? And as I've said before, I like to keep this two-story thing going. It's not going to be forever. I might just go down to one story, depending on the lengths of the stories I get sent, So remember to keep your stories coming in. I can adapt them a little bit and without losing your story, I can, pad it out a bit so it's good for reading. But please send them over to me because, the more stock that I have, the more I can keep this show going. But I want to get straight on with it and tell you these two creepy tales because you're going to love them, all right? So, get ready, hold on tight, eyes closed, candles lit, sit back, put your headphones on and relax. And now it's time for story number 1, The Lady in the Mirror. I grew up in an old Edwardian house in the Midlands, UK. A place with a charm that, looking back, I never truly appreciated. The house was beautiful, preserving many of its original features, like intricate woodwork, stained glass windows, and long echoing hallways with black and white checkerboard tiles. These days, such a house would be worth a small fortune, but back then, to a young child, it just felt like an old dusty maze I called home. I lived there with my 2 sisters, my mum, my dad, and our dogs. Though I had little sense of the house's grandeur at the time, it carried an undeniable weight, as if the air inside was saturated with memories. The kind of weight that made you feel like you were never entirely alone. It's strange how you can grow so accustomed to something that you don't even realise how unsettling it is until you look back years later. The hallways were particularly eerie. They seemed impossibly long, stretching further than they had any right to, especially at night. By day, the sunlight would stream in through the tall windows, illuminated the fading tiles. But at night, shadows crept into every corner, and there, in the middle of it all, hung the mirror. A tall, gilded thing that seemed far too ornate for the modest home. Positioned perfectly, it reflected the entire length of the hallway. It became an unspoken rule to avoid it at night, not because of any incident, at least not at first, but because it always felt like the mirror was watching you. The house had been in our family for decades, passed down from one generation to the next. My bedroom was massive, one of those oversized rooms with high ceilings that old houses always seem to have. It was my refuge. Having 2 sisters was a recipe for chaos, so I fiercely guarded my privacy. My room was my sanctuary, my safe place, or at least that's what I thought. But this house had secrets, whispers, unspoken things that lurked just out of sight. For years, my sisters and I would eavesdrop on adult conversations, catching fragments of gossip about the strange happenings. There was the story about my grandmother waking up to find a little girl standing silently beside her bed, staring at her with wide, unblinking eyes. Then there was my father's account of his belongings vanishing, only to reappear in places he swore he had never put them. These tales were dismissed as family folklore, harmless oddities in an otherwise ordinary life, but they planted seeds in my mind. Seeds that would one day sprout into something far darker. One night, as we all lay in bed, I heard it for the first time. The piano. Our old upright piano sat in the ground floor drawing room, a relic from another era. It was rarely played and mostly served as a piece of decor. But that night, it played. At first, just a few random notes, tentative, like a child testing the keys. Then, slowly, the notes began to form chords, disjointed but deliberate. My heart raced as I lay frozen in bed, straining to hear every sound. The house was silent except for those haunting notes, each one echoing through the still air. I wanted to believe it was one of my sisters, but I knew better. None of us dared leave our rooms at night. When I asked my family about it the next morning, they looked at me blankly. "What piano?" my mum had said with a chuckle. "You must have been dreaming." But I wasn't. I knew what I'd heard, and it wasn't a dream. The piano played for me, and me alone. After that, small things began to happen. The dogs, usually calm, started barking at nothing, their heads snapping towards unseen movements in the corners of the room. Shadows would flicker across the walls when no one was moving, and doors would creak open or shut on their own. But the most unnerving part wasn't what I saw or heard, it was what I felt. The house wasn't empty. Something was there, watching and waiting. It wasn't malevolent, not exactly, but it wasn't friendly either. It was just there, like a constant pressure in the room. The most terrifying moment of all came one bright afternoon. My parents were sitting in the living room, and I was alone at the far end of the hallway, plunking out random notes on the piano. The sunlight poured in through the windows, bathing the room in a warm glow. I felt safe in the daylight, confident that whatever lurked in the shadows at night wouldn't dare show itself now. But I was wrong. As I played, I caught a movement out the corner of my eye, a flicker, just at the edge of my vision. I stopped playing and looked around, my heart thudding in my chest. The room was empty, except for me and the piano. Shaking my head, I convinced myself it must have been my hair, which was long and often fell into my face. I resumed playing, but the feeling didn't go away. It was like being under a microscope, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on me. Then it happened again. This time, the movement was unmistakable. A shadow, quick but deliberate, passing just behind me. I froze, my hands hovering over the keys, and I slowly turned my head. Nothing. The room was still and silent, except for the faint ticking of a clock somewhere in the distance. I bolted from the room, my heart pounding as I sped down the hallway. The mirror loomed ahead of me, its surface gleaming in the afternoon light. Something compelled me to stop, to look. As I leaned in, staring at my own pale reflection, I saw her. A woman. She moved across the far end of the hallway behind me, her figure blurry but distinct. She was dressed in something old-fashioned, her head slightly bowed as she walked, seemingly unaware of me. My breath hitched and I spun around, expecting to see her standing there. But the hallway was empty. The tiles gleamed and the air still. She was gone. I turned back to the mirror, desperate for another glimpse, but it reflected only me. My hands shook as I backed away, my pulse roaring in my ears. I told myself that I was imagining things, that it was a trick of light. But it wasn't. I knew what I'd seen. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside made my skin crawl. The house felt alive. Its walls breathing, its shadows shifting. I kept replaying the image of the woman in my mind. Who was she? Why had she appeared to me? In the years that followed, I left the house to attend college and eventually settled far away. My parents still lived there, unbothered by the strange occurrences that persist. They've grown accustomed to the piano's nightly serenades and the occasional shadow flickering in the corner of their vision. They say it's just the house's way of reminding them it's alive, but for me it will always be more than that. It's a place where time blurs, and where the past and present overlap, and where I saw the lady in the mirror. Wow. Thank you, Tom, for sending that in. Well, them old houses, they're full of these spirits, aren't they? They are full of them. And from my own personal experience, which was in an old house like that, not as big by the sounds of it, but, you know, they are, you can feel it in the walls and in the air, you know. And it doesn't always have to be negative and dark feelings, you know. Sometimes it's just the presence of something being around. It doesn't mean it's going to be out to get you. But, you know, it's weird how you heard the piano that night, only you, in the silent house when no one else did, you know. Why only you? And when you looked in the mirror and you saw the lady pass by behind you, you know, you're the only one who saw that. I mean, was she trying to, I don't know, grab your attention in some way or another? I don't know. But yeah, that was a great story, and I could really imagine it. You know, I could really picture the house, and yeah, nice one, Tom. Thank you. And now for story number 2, The Eyes. I had a great childhood, filled with adventures that felt straight out of a movie like Stand By Me. Every day after school, my friends and I would run outside, ready for whatever thrill the evening held. We'd play until the streetlights flickered on, daring fate by staying out just a little longer, and hoping our parents wouldn't call us home too soon. We were an inseparable pack, fearless, full of energy and living each day as if it was our last. Our neighbourhood was our kingdom. We knew every shortcut, every alley and every hidden nook like the back of our hands. It felt like the street belonged to us, and we roamed them with the sense of pride and ownership. We also knew every house in the area, who lived where, which houses were friendly and which houses were best avoided. But there was one house that stood out from all of the rest. It was an old, boarded-up relic of a home, its windows sealed with weathered wooden planks and its yard overtaken by wild, tangled weeds. The neighbourhood kids called it the ghost house. No one lived there, at least not as far as we knew, and it had been abandoned for as long as we could remember. Its decaying exterior and eerie stillness made it the perfect breeding ground for our imaginations. We often hung around outside, daring each other to get closer, making up wild stories about what might be inside. We pictured blood-stained walls and pentagrams scrawled in dark red and ghosts roaming its creaky halls. No one had ever been inside though, at least not until we decided we would be the first. One crisp winter afternoon, we finally mustered up the courage to go inside. It was getting dark by 4 or 5 p.m. during that time of the year, which gave us plenty of cover while still being early enough to avoid suspicion from our parents. We geared up like amateur ninjas, dressed up head to toe in black, thinking it would help us blend in. In reality, we probably just looked ridiculous, but we were dead serious about our mission. After all, this wasn't just a silly dare anymore, it was our destiny. The house's front door was too exposed to the street, so we decided to try our luck at the back entrance. Years of abandonment had taken their toll on the place, and after some determined tugging and prying, we managed to force the rotting back door open just enough to squeeze inside. The air was thick, cold and smelled like mildew or old wood. The pitch-black interior swallowed us whole. Luckily, Jimmy and Rob had borrowed their dad's flashlights, but the narrow beams of the light did little to cut through the darkness. If anything, they made the place seem even scarier. The place was a decaying mess, water-stained wallpaper peeling off the walls, and the floor was littered with crumpling newspapers, scattered bottles and broken furniture. Graffiti covered nearly every surface though it was hardly the spooky symbols we had imagined, just the usual crude messages from other kids who had braved the place before us. We crept through the first floor, huddled together and whispering nervously. Every creak of the old wooden floorboards beneath our feet made us freeze, with our hearts pounding in our chests. The living room was the worst. Empty beer cans, whiskey bottles and a filthy old mattress told us someone had probably squatted there at some point. The air felt oppressive, like the house itself didn't want us there. Despite every instinct telling us to leave, we pressed on. We spotted a narrow staircase leading up to the second floor, its banister covered in cobwebs. No one wanted to go first, and after much bickering and whispering, we decided Jimmy would lead and Rob would hold the second flashlight, and I, somehow, would be the last in the line, the darkness pressing against my back like a living thing. The stairs groaned beneath our weight as we ascended, holding our breath with each step. At the top, we found 3 rooms and a bathroom, each one more decrepit than the last. The first bedroom was much like the living room downstairs, abandoned and filled with trash. The old mattress in the corner looked stained and occupied. We quickly backed out, shivering despite the stillness of the house. The bathroom was so revolting that none of us dared step inside. Mould covered every surface and the air reeked of rot. Spiders had claimed it long ago, spinning thick webs that draped across the cracked sink and shattered mirror. Just as we were beginning to relax, convinced that the scariest thing we'd find was the smell, we heard it. A faint shuffling sound. We all froze. "What was that?" someone whispered, barely able to get the words out. Before we could even move, the sound came again, this time louder, coming from the last room down the hall. Jimmy raised his flashlight, his hands trembling. "We have to check it out," he stammered, trying to sound brave. We crept toward the room, every step slow and cautious. The closer we got, the louder the shuffling grew, like something was moving around just beyond the half-closed door. Jimmy quietly gave the hand signal for us to come over and gather around him, and with agonising slowness, he nudged open the door. The old hinges groaned like a living thing, and as the door swung inward, a sudden gust of cold air rushed out, chilling us to the bone. We stared into the room, hearts pounding. The beam of flashlight quivered as it swept across the dark, empty space, until it landed on 2 pale, unblinking eyes staring back at us from the far corner. Before we could process what we were seeing, bang! Something heavy slammed against the floor, sending us into a panic frenzy. We bolted, screaming and tripping over ourselves as we hurtled down the stairs like madmen. The flashlight beam jerked wildly, casting eerie shadows that only fueled our terror. We crashed through the back door and ran as fast as our legs could carry us, not daring to look back. We didn't stop until we were several streets away, gasping for air and clutching our sides. Then, as the adrenaline wore off, we started laughing. It was wild, uncontrollable laughter, the kind that comes from sheer relief. We playfully accused each other of being the most scared, each of us secretly glad we'd made it out in one piece. But none of us ever went back. And even now, I still can't forget those cold, unblinking eyes staring out from the darkness. I absolutely loved that story. That was a glimpse. That was a glimpse into my childhood. I know many kids, when you're growing up, you go through these phases, where you explore the neighbourhood or whatever, and you find all these places, old empty houses, and it's all part of the thrill. And I did the exact same things, and it was the best days, you know, in hindsight. When you look back, it was amazing. I loved them days, going around on your BMX with your friends, and just like you said, you know, your area, it was your kingdom, and you knew every nook and cranny of the town, and you know, what great memories. But the eyes, I mean, this could be a supernatural thing, or it could just be a scary thing, right? I mean, it could be someone who's squatting there, someone who's been in there and they've kind of claimed it as their space, and you were literally just, you know, invading their own little privacy, if you know what I mean. But there's no doubt about it that seeing them eyes in the pitch black silent house, seeing them eyes staring at you, would make you bolt out the house that quick. It would make me absolutely shit myself, in all honesty. But yeah, wow, that was a great story. And yeah, I mean, I guess if you'd hung around a little longer, maybe things would have been made a bit more sense. But supernatural or just outright creepy, we don't know on this one, but it's still a great story. So thank you for sending that in. And thank you very much for everyone for tuning in again for this episode. It's been excellent. And yeah, I will see you for the next one. I've had a few more stories sent in lately, and it's great to have, you know, the stock coming into me. So if you've got any stories, I know I say this a lot, and I will keep saying it, all right? But if you have any paranormal stories of any kind, I mean, it doesn't always have to be paranormal. It can just be outright weird, okay? But we aim for the paranormal because that's what we're about. But if you've got something that you think it would sound great on this show, then please send it over, and it would be an honour to read it out for you as part of the Terror Cellar, okay? So remember just to send it to the Terror Cellar podcast at gmail.com. Send your stories there, and I will be waiting at the other end with open arms, especially for you. Anyway, it is the end of the show now, so thank you so much again. And yeah, I will see you for the next week's episode 16, is that right? Episode 16 of the Terror Cellar, with more great stories for your delight. Now it's time for me to go, so remember, don't have nightmares. Bye bye.